Good evening. Welcome to our 2018 Election Forum series here on WEFS and at FloridaToday.com. I'm Isadora Rangel, Florida Today's engagement editor and your host for this evening. Tonight on stage with me, we're going to meet two candidates running to represent Brevard County in the state legislature. They're running in Senate District 14, stretching from Volusia down to Rockledge, and Florida House District 50, covering northern Brevard and East Orange counties. We have two Democrats on stage tonight with me. The first one is Mel Martin from Senate District 14 and Pam Dershka, who's running in House District 50. Their Republican opponents declined our invitation to attend tonight's forum. They are Dorothy Hugo and Renee Plasencia. Before we start, we're going to go over the rules. Each candidate gets 1 minute to answer my questions, as well as 1 minute for their opening and closing statements. And before we begin, I want to thank Eastern Florida State College for partnering with Florida Today. So let's begin with our opening statements. The first one to go is Pam Dershka. You have 1 minute.
My name is Pam Dershka, and I'm a candidate for House District 50, which includes North Brevard and East Orange. I grew up on a farm in Iowa without running water, and now I live on the Space Coast watching rockets launch and with solar panels on our roof and an electric car in the driveway. During that span of time, I was a teacher, had my own windsurfing business, was a partner with my husband in a computer business for more than 20 years, and raised a family. The reason I am running for office is to restore citizen democracy. Right now, the focus is on special interests and big money. We need citizens involved to focus on their needs such as healthcare, public education, a clean environment, and expanding solar. I want to re-engage people in our democracy and restore confidence in government of, by, and for the people. Thank you.
Thank you. Mel?
Hi, Melissa Martin. I'm running for Florida State Senator on District 14. I am a Florida native, retired Marine major, and a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and Barry University School of Law. I served as a Marine judge advocate in the Marine Corps. I'm also a wife and mother of 3 boys and an organizational leader in fighting corruption and fighting fracking in Florida and trying to restore and clean up our lagoon. I'm running because we need more advocates in Tallahassee. We need responsible governance based on the science and the evidence and reason to protect and promote the public interest. We should expect our public officials to routinely appear in town halls, office calls, public forums, listening events, and because that's what I believe that democracy should look like. And that is what I will bring to the table. Thank you.
Thank you. So our first question is, name 2 to 3 issues you will focus on if elected and on which you would like to file legislation. Mel, we'll start with you.
Sure. My top 3 platform priorities are anti-corruption, and the second is a healthy environment, which is directed primarily to cleaning up and restoring our lagoon. And a third is to promote smart growth communities. I've said many times in my previous talks that green economies is where it's at. We live on the Space Coast. We have the institutions and the structure and the foundation laid out where we can invest in research and development and have spin-off businesses and grow more jobs and connect with our educational institutions to have a really impressive regional economy right here in the Space Coast. So I look forward to that, and the first thing is, of course, we need to remove the vice grip that the big corporate lobbyists have in our government. That's the first thing.
Pam, 2 to 3 issues you will focus on if elected.
Really, because the reason that I am running for office is because I think that we need to focus back on people issues. That means my platform is quite broad, but 3 of the things that I would start with would be to expand Medicaid. That was something that we should have had. There are a lot of people that are in that hole that are not getting health care. I would also think that our citizens in Brevard raised a tax on themselves to support the lagoon, and I think our state should have matched that, so I'll work to get matching funds for that. And the third area that I would really address would be solar. Rooftop solar is, I'll try to expand on this later, but rooftop solar is really an important thing for our state, the Sunshine State, and yet so many of we aren't supporting it properly. So I think we need to do that.
Thank you. So let's begin with the Indian River Lagoon, since you both brought it up. First question is, what is a major issue at the state level affecting the lagoon today, and how would you address it? And please stick to the state level and what would you do at the state level to help the local efforts. Pam, you're going first.
Okay. Well, as far as the lagoon, I think the first issue would be to get the matching funds that I just mentioned. But beyond that, we have red tide, we have blue-green algae that is just causing great harm on both of our coasts and down through Lake Okeechobee. And I would direct our water management districts and our DEP to do what they are supposed to do, and that's protect our environment. We have been missing that for the last 10, 20 years, and it's really starting to be evident. And so I would push forward on that.
Mel?
I've talked with many experts and advocates and environmentalists over the last 3 years or so, and they all point to the need and the critical need of funds. That's the bottom line. So I would say that the bill that Senator Mayfield tried to get through the Senate last year, it has merit, and it's something that I would like to work off of and work with her if she's interested in redoing that this year. It allocates funds from the Land Acquisition Trust Fund of Florida Forever, Amendment 1 funds, and properly makes sure that it goes toward restoring our environment. And I would just add the caveat that we should, when we're doing matched funds, we should ensure that the local governments that would be eligible for these grants, this grant money, would have skin in the game as well. So Brevard would probably be at the top of that list that would receive this type of money, these types of funds, and it should directly go to the capital improvement projects that we desperately need.
Thank you. And just to clarify, Senator Debbie Mayfield's bill would allocate $50 million annually to the lagoon using Amendment 1 dollars,
Yes.
for those who don't know. So move on to the next question, which is related to septic tanks. We all know the harm that they can do to the lagoon and other waterways. So my question is, do you support a state ban on septic tanks along the lagoon as the one imposed in the Florida Keys, or mandating septic tank inspections? If not, what's your plan to address septic tanks that pollute Florida waterways? And Mel, you're going first.
Sure. Just kind of dovetailing off of what I was just saying with the caveats in the bill, the local government, in order to be eligible, would also have to demonstrate a moratorium on the septic tank for new development within a certain range of the water table, or to include the shoreline and any channels that go right into the lagoon, any impaired water. So that moratorium should be in place. Luckily, we already have one in place and hope it's extended. But I believe in leading a horse to water more than blanket bans. Last resort, yes. If that's the only way that we're going to be able to do this, then we can tailor a ban to ensure that the worst offenders, the new development, grows responsibly. However, I believe that inspecting old tanks is not going to do anything but waste money, because old tanks are presumed to be contributing to the problem.
Thank you. Pam, on a statewide ban on septic tanks along the lagoon?
Actually, I got involved in water quality issues back when I went to a program that was up in the Panhandle area where we used to live, that was about septic tanks and the hazard that they provided to our waters. And from that point on, I've spent a lot of time, both my husband and I have spent a lot of time involved in water quality issues. The septic tank ban that is on in Brevard is very appropriate, and I think it needs to be extended. We just don't have the right geology, to handle septic tanks around the water sources. The inspection of the tanks that was in place and it got removed, I think probably is appropriate. I would look into I refer to Mel on a lot of issues like that, so I will look into that a little bit more, but thank you.
Thank you. Next question is, Florida voters in 2014 passed Amendment 1 to set aside money for land and water conservation, including the purchase of environmentally sensitive lands. Environmental groups say lawmakers have misused the money by paying for routine operating expenses. Do you believe the legislature has allocated the money appropriately? If not, what would you do differently? Pam?
I think that the money that comes out of our Florida legislature is often misappropriated, and definitely the Amendment 1 funds were not used as the voters overwhelmingly supported. So I would say that definitely we need to follow what was set aside by our citizens. Another area that is also true is in the affordable housing with the Sadowski Fund. That was set aside, and it has been used for whatever pet project has been in our legislature. And I think that we need to honor what the citizens vote, and it was needed, and that's why the citizens went that direction. So,
Mel?
It was absolutely misappropriated. As a staff judge advocate and as a judge advocate in various capacities when I was in the Marine Corps, I would work on fiscal law issues. And the federal law has a nice thing called the purpose statute, 31 USC 1301 alpha, if anyone cared. But that is something that helps to make sure that if and when money has a purpose, that money will be monitored and followed through to ensure that every red cent of the taxpayers' money goes to that purpose. I would love to see such a statute in Florida law if it's not there already. And if it is there, we need to comply with it. So between the purpose statute and, that would cover every other purpose funds to include the Sadowski funds and everything else the voters have clearly stated how they want their government managed.
Thank you.
could I add a comment?
Nope. Let's not try to do that. We're going to have plenty of time later on. But let's move on to education now, and maybe we'll come back to the lagoon. Florida ranks 42nd nationally in public school spending. Would you raise taxes to increase education funding? If not, how can lawmakers increase funding for schools? And Mel, you're going first.
Sure. Whenever we get into taxing and spending, I would really like to, I would be more comfortable in knowing all of my options first. There are some things I don't know yet in the Leviathan that is Tallahassee. So I would personally want to exhaust all potential sources of monies that is currently being wasted and divert that appropriately. I think education is the pillar of our society, and it deserves due priority in our budget management. So, and in my opinion, it is where we need to invest our funds so we don't get the follow-through social issues, justice issues, healthcare issues, and things like that, because we have a poorly educated citizenry. So I think that over time, it'll work itself out if we devote enough funds to education.
Thank you. Pam, on education funding?
The current governor candidate has proposed some interesting guidelines for his suggestion, and I would be in support of them. One of the things that he has suggested, this is Andrew Gillum, he has suggested that we should use some of the funds that were in some corporate tax that was taken away federally, and we should use that to fund our schools, particularly the salaries of our teachers, to have a starting salary of $50,000, which would then also adjust across the board. And I think that would be one good step to take that would show how much we appreciate education, how much we appreciate the teachers in our state, and I think that will spread throughout our educational system. Regarding the other funds, I think that it does take review before I would say I would raise taxes, but we need to review them.
Thank you. And let's move on to charter schools, a very interesting topic. Do you support the legislature's recent push to expand charter schools, including a $200 million fund to motivate them to open next to struggling public schools? Pam?
I absolutely do not support that. The charter schools started out as an interesting, basically experiment in education, so that a school was able to have a little bit more flexibility and perhaps have some way of influencing the education of their students and be able to pass on to the rest of the schools. It has spread far beyond that now. There are for-profit charter schools, and I think that too much money has been taken out of our public money to go to these private efforts. I also would say that charter schools should be held more accountable. And at first, that seemed to be a good thing, but now it has gone so far beyond and spread so far that it's really hurting our public schools and the education that our students have across the state. So, no.
Mel, on charter schools?
I agree with Pam. It'd be one thing if the charter school system worked. I think if we had the evidence and the data that shows that scores are going up, that teachers are happier and more efficient and effective, and everyone's great, the communities are happy, I think that would be one thing that would help the decision to expand what we're doing. Unfortunately, it's not working. The statistics that I'm getting just from the Chamber of Commerce, Florida's Chamber of Commerce, both the third grade and eighth grade levels of reading and math are in the decline. That's not what we want. So if something's not working and siphoning money away from public school systems is not working, maybe we should stop doing what's not working and figure this out.
All right, so let's move on to vocational training. Should the legislature require school districts to offer more vocational training in middle and high schools, such as welding, manufacturing, and other trades? If so, how should lawmakers accomplish that? Mel?
Absolutely. I think that there is a role for state government, albeit a facilitating role, not so much a government intervention role, in helping to connect the dots between educational systems and the local and regional industries. I believe that the workforce can be clearly identified as to needs and capabilities that, if you want a job in that area, this is what you need to know. So already, places like Harris and Lockheed Martin are reaching out on their end to develop these types of apprenticeship programs with various schools and trying to connect those dots. Likewise, the schools should be reaching out to other industries in the area. And I think that the Florida State Legislature can help with, like I said, facilitating, maybe monitoring and reporting and things like that to really spur this type of connections that will only help our economy.
Pam?
I'm not sure that the state level should require, but I also do agree that it's very important for our students to have things that really are of interest to them, and it not all geared towards college. I think that there was a lot of that when I was a kid growing up, and there was a lot of experiences that people had that were real positive, that made them be able to enjoy an algebra class because they got to go to shop, or different things that just drew them in. And so I think that we have a lot of resources in this county with so many businesses that really could help set some programs up, and I would like to encourage that at the state level without necessarily mandating it.
And still talking about education funding, one of the great impasses over education funding in the legislature has been whether to allow school districts to capture tax revenue from increased property values through the so-called require local effort. Some Republicans believe that represents a tax increase for homeowners when their property values rise. Should the legislature allow districts to collect those dollars, or should it force them to reduce their tax rates? Explain your position and why you believe it. Pam, you're going first.
This beginning of the year, I took part in a Citizens Academy that was offered by our county and the IFAS program, and it was really an excellent program that we attended. Quite a few people that I know went to that. And when we had people from each department talk to us about their funds, it was really almost startling how desperate they were for funding to be able to continue to provide the level of service that they wanted to do. I think that if people's tax property goes up, that gives them funds that I think that the county should be able to apply. It doesn't mean there's a tax increase, it just means their value of their property is more and it should go up. So I do agree that that should be passed.
Mel?
I do believe that the local governments have the rightful purview on this matter. So in the vein of home rule authority, I would give the decision up to the counties and the municipalities to figure out for themselves. I don't believe it's appropriate for a state level mandate to do anything, because the communities have the right to self-determine, to flourish or to, in the name of no taxes, decay. So there is a right there for communities to figure that out, and if the people of those communities don't like it, they can vote those leaders out. That's the way it's supposed to be.
Thank you. So let's move on to school security for a little bit. After the Parkland shooting, the legislature passed a sweeping law that puts more money towards school security, approves a Guardian program to arm school employees, increases gun control, and increases mental health funding. What parts of this bill did you like, and what parts do you disagree with? Mel?
I liked pretty much everything except for the Guardian program. I believe it unnecessarily brings more threat and risk into our classrooms. And being a mother of 3 boys in those classrooms, it's a personal issue for me. So I draw my experience as a Marine, like I said, a Marine and a Marine judge advocate, having seen plenty of things happen in the field or even on base, from recruits to colonels. That everyone is susceptible to negligently discharging their weapon. Or just forgetting they put it somewhere and a child is able to get it. Or those are human issues. Negligence is foreseeable. And we can't guarantee either way that we're going to be able to keep our kids safe through any program. I'm sorry to say that. So we have to look at the data, we have to look at the actual odds of the issue. And what the odds say is that it is much more likely that things are going to go down bad in schools with more guns in the classrooms.
Pam, what did you like and dislike about the Marjorie Stoneman Act?
Well, the additional mental health counseling provided was really important, and I think that's apart from this particular situation, but across the board we need to have more of that so that counselors can actually spend time with students and assist them. Life is really stressful in school now, and I think that there needs to be more mental health, attention to mental health. I agree with Mel that the Guardian program was actually kind of forced on the schools without proper funds to be able to implement it the way that a school might like, and so it really I attended many of the town halls and school board meetings regarding this, and there is no way that I think a person on the staff at a school should have the additional responsibility of carrying a gun in the classroom or anywhere on campus. The incidence of causing more harm is definitely true.
Thank you. Now, this is actually a question from a reader. When a person turns 18 in Florida, he or she gains the right to vote, get a driver's license without parental permission, and serve on a jury. However, the legislature increased the age to buy a firearm to 21. Do you support that, and do you see this as an infringement on the Second Amendment? Pam?
That's kind of a tough one. I feel for a student that wants the rights, but I really think that the development of the brain in studies is not complete, even at 21, actually. And I think I do support a limitation, but I can understand their frustration at that choice. I think that the guidelines really need to be stronger for gun ownership across many different areas. And so when we drive a car, we have limitations of what we must do as far as having insurance and being able to use the car. So I think it is right that there can be limitations placed on it. So I hope that when the student that's 18 to 21 age reaches that age, they'll be able to look back and think maybe it was appropriate.
Thank you. Mel?
I've seen this issue since entering the military as well. The fact that 17-year-olds can enlist and yet they are not able to drink, et cetera, et cetera. And this is another type of those types of issues that apparently don't make sense. It's not an infringement on the Second Amendment right because of the context that it is built on the issue of brain development and maturity and sound decision making, et cetera. However, in further context here in Florida, with the loopholes of gun shows and private exchanges, et cetera, it becomes a non-issue. It's as if the law is not even there. So it doesn't matter.
So let's move on to so-called assault weapons. There was great debate in the legislature this year on whether to ban those weapons. I would like to ask, what is your position on an assault weapons ban? And feel free to define what an assault weapon is, because I understand that's a big part of the issue. Mel, you can go first.
Sure. An assault weapon is just like a defensive weapon. It's just how you use it. I think that the concern is that military-grade weapons that are designed for mass killing on the field or designed for urban warfare are not appropriate in civilian hands. And to add to that, the high-capacity magazines and things that allow for mass shootings to occur, again, is not appropriate for a civilian society who wishes to fulfill their rights to peace, to ensure domestic tranquility and things like that. Because we do have that right. We have the Second Amendment right. We also have the right to peace. So I believe that the issue of military-grade weapons is that unless and until there is some sort of ban, I can't even imagine the tailoring of that type of bill. But before that happens, I think we can look into registering based on a tiered system and ensure that our the people that decide to, I'm sorry, I'm just going to finish my sentence.
Go ahead.
And that decide to purchase these types of weapons that they don't need for hunting, they don't need for self-defense, are paying fees and registering, making sure that everything is squared away.
Thank you. Do you support an assault weapons ban or not, Pam?
I do support it. I don't believe that anyone needs to have a gun that is designed for war to be in the hands of our civilian society. I would make an exception to gun ranges, perhaps, where if a person really loves that, they can go and be able, but it would be kept there on site, but not to be just loose in the back of somebody's truck or in the back seat of their car. I think that we make restrictions on hunting in Florida so that they can use a shotgun to shoot waterfowl, and they're limited to 3 shells. And yet we have these machines that can kill people without the limitations. So I think we need to really consider what situation happens with these mass casualties.
Thank you. And to follow up on that, you're both Democrats running in Republican-leaning districts. How can you assure your constituency that you're not here to perhaps infringe on their Second Amendment rights? Pam, you can go first.
Well, I think we talked about other situations where there are limitations that are sensible, and I think that we are not talking about taking away everyone's guns. I haven't heard anybody in the group I'm around that has talked about that. But we do want to make sure that people are safe. And I think that there's a lot more we need to do to perhaps register guns, perhaps to charge tax on guns and ammunition. So there are some steps that I think we should take. The schools now are spending a lot of money to have patrols at their schools with our resource officers, and I think some of that money should come from the gun industry because that is why we need that protection. So I'm not planning to take anybody's guns away other than the assault weapons that should be.
Thank you. Mel?
So a basic tenet of my political philosophy in general is that I believe in living free without harming others. And it just so happens that's pretty much what the Constitution is based on as well. It has a very structured approach of balancing individual rights with collective rights. And so in response to those types of concerns, I understand, I'm sure that, and I've seen some of the material and the information that comes out that might help to worry people of those issues. But once you look at the law, once you understand the law, the people have the right to say who gets to own what and where. And that's the law of the land. So if you believe in the law of the land, you would agree with me and you have no worries. So it's only when you think that you want things anyway outside of the law that we might have an issue.
All right, let's move on to health care. Right off the bat, I'll ask, should the legislature expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act to cover uninsured, low-income people who do not qualify for the federal subsidies? Mel?
What was the question?
Should the legislature expand Medicaid?
Yes. We have, 2.5 million Floridians without health insurance coverage. After a certain number, the brain stops to care, right? But 2.5 million Floridians, I think I saw it's 12.5% of us don't have a way to be covered, to go see a doctor and not worry about it. Now, we also have issues with premiums and paying back the actual payments, et cetera. But I think that an expansion on Medicaid to critical areas of our society especially is necessary as a start.
Pam?
I definitely think that the Medicaid expansion should have been accepted, and I think it should be put into place as soon as possible. I have friends that do not have health care now that did, and people should not die because they don't have health care. People should not have to juggle whether they're going to pay for we we are a civilized society, and we need to treat each other better than to create holes in our coverage. The whole Affordable Care Act was based on the expansion of Medicaid, and for Florida to not have that has really, really hurt our citizens.
And probably one of the most controversial conversations regarding Medicaid is whether there should be a work requirement for Medicaid recipients in Florida. Do you believe there should be one, or that there shouldn't be one? Pam?
The work requirement really puts people in a bind that are already in a difficult situation. If they're having health issues, to have to do all the documentation. You know, it sounds kind of reasonable just from first blush, but when you really look at what is required, it makes a very difficult situation for people. So no, I don't think that should be required.
Mel?
The administration of something like that would be overwhelmingly burdensome and costly, so absolutely not.
Okay, so let's move on to taxes. Andrew Gillum, the Democrat running for governor, has proposed a corporate tax increase in Florida. Would you support that? And do you agree with critics who say that would stall the state's economy, raise prices, and scare businesses away? Mel?
I would approach it in a way where, looking at what President Trump has already done to remove the corporate tax, to raise it back to a certain extent, but then use that as a program of incentives for the way that we want corporations to behave in Florida. Meaning, if you're a corporation that pollutes, that you are going to make amends and ensure that you don't pollute anymore. Or if you're going to ensure that your workers receive a livable wage, your tax bracket should go back down. Not tax bracket, but your taxes should go back down. Things like that would enable us to pull good behavior out of the private industries while rewarding the people that we want to reward.
Pam?
And I think I mentioned this in my opening, but I do support it. I think that when this is money that the corporations were having to spend, and so it's not going to be unduly burdensome for them. I also think that the corporations will benefit when that money is used for increasing our education, to creating a better environment that will make workers want to come and work for them and provide the necessary infrastructure that they need to be able to do their business. So I think in the long run, it will benefit the corporations. So.
And Pam, you kind of touched upon this, but Gillum's plan is estimated to raise around $1 billion. We'd like to hear your thoughts on how would you spend the money if that were ever to go into effect?
I think he suggested using that for the teacher salaries to raise that level. And I think that is an excellent way to use that money. We have a lot of needs in our state, so there are other areas that we also need, but I think that's probably the first step, and I think that's what he promised, so I would like him to follow through on that.
Mel?
I would totally sponsor the accompanying bill.
To raise teacher salaries?
For the teachers, yes, ma'am.
Okay. So let's talk about minimum wage. Should the legislature raise the minimum wage? If so, to how much? And do you believe that would negatively impact employers and businesses? Mel?
Unfortunately, it will impact a good number of employers. I believe in livable wages. I believe that is a basic balance of our society between, the parties of the employer-employee. That employment service contract should be balanced, and it should be made by equal bargaining power. And sometimes that power can only be done collectively. So the minimum wage issue is a tough one, to be sure, but I would like to, one, get much smarter on it, two, look to see how city or local governments can help accomplish this issue, And going back to the incentives of tax rebates, et cetera, for corporations that choose to up their ante and pay their people livable wages. Let's see if that works or not. So there's a lot of different things that we can do
Before you actually...
before the sweep. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Pam?
I would like to see it implemented, but in stages so that companies are able to adjust and to so that we don't want to see businesses close, that's for sure. And I have been a business owner myself, and I certainly didn't pay a livable wage when I had my windsurfing business back years ago. But I think that the stages of applying, and I think the $15 minimum wage is really something that we should set a goal for and then have it be adjusted so that that stays a reasonable rate. But I think businesses will be able to survive and actually thrive when their employees are doing better. So I think that we need to work to get there, but we should give it a little bit of time.
And let's talk about the opioid crisis, obviously an issue that affects the entire state and Brevard County. There was a law passed this year that requires doctors to check a statewide database when prescribing from a list of more than 100 drugs. It also created a 3 to 7 day limit on prescription of opioids. So my question is that law adequate, and what else should the legislature do to address the opioid crisis? Pam?
The opioid crisis needs to be addressed, and I would really turn to other experts in the field to be able to get guidance on that. I think that the pharmacies, having the list and having to check that is really good. I also think we need to keep working with our medical profession to keep educating them really on the effects and ways that they can reduce the use of these opioids, and that's what I think.
Mel?
It's a nice start. I believe that much more needs to be done, and when you look at the opioid crisis from a person's vantage point, you have the beginning of why there's a crisis. You have the prescription of drugs that just turns their brain chemicals into, must have. And from there, whatever's available is what they have to go next. And so the problem that we have right now is that there are no transition resources like rehab hospitals or beds that can house these folks to give them time to get off and restore their brain chemistry to where they need to be. And there are a lot of other things that can be, that can go to mitigate the issue. Different types of substances that can also help to ease the transition. So I think a huge funding gap is the rehab hospitals and the beds.
Okay. And still in the topic of healthcare, kind of, do you support abortion rights? And if so, should women be allowed to get late-term abortions, and in what circumstances? Mel, you go first.
I'm in alignment with the current law of the land, where before viability, the government doesn't have the authority to infringe on the privacy rights to plan one's family. It's a tough issue. I have my personal beliefs, but as a statesman in Tallahassee, I would ensure that this would be a great bipartisan effort to ensure that we are working on getting the unwanted pregnancy count down. And fortunately, I think it was last year that the trend was noticed that the number of abortions was lower than the number that predated Roe v. Wade. And I think that in addition to that, there was no additional birth count. So fewer women are having fewer unwanted pregnancies. So I would definitely be on the train to help continue that trend in Florida.
Pam, on abortion rights.
I believe that women deserve the right to control their own bodies in consultation with their doctors, not politicians. My father-in-law was a police officer in the days before Roe v. Wade, and he saw horrible things happen, and I don't want to return us to those days. I also agree with Mel that whatever we can do to prevent unwanted pregnancies, we should do to avoid the situation altogether.
Okay, so let's move on to politics a little bit. Democrats are in the minority in the legislature, in particular in the House, where Republicans have a supermajority. If elected, how will you ensure your proposals get approved by Republicans? Pam, you're going first.
That's a tough one. I watched this last year's votes with most of the Democrats not even being able to get a bill put forward. When they were able to put amendments forward, they got voted down one after another. And that made me more determined than ever to run for office and to be successful so that I can be one more in the numbers so that we will be able to have more of a voice. I think the closer that we come to parity, and if we become the majority, we will be able to be successful in putting our bills forward and make it successful. If not, I just had a dinner up in Mims with a couple of Republicans. We're sitting at a table. We went to a chicken dinner, and a couple of Republicans, and we had conversation back and forth, and we were able to discuss a lot of issues and found that we could come to some agreement, even though we disagreed on many of the aspects. So I would continue to try and work on it with those that are around us.
Well, you might have an easier time in the Senate. We have more Democrats there, but still controlled by Republicans. So how do you plan to work with Republicans and make sure that your legislation gets passed by them?
Well, I think it's a luxury in my case that my top priorities are all nonpartisan issues. And that says something, I think. I think so many things have gotten so bad that the important issues are all just nonpartisan issues. So I believe that as long as that Republican or those Republicans have due deference to science and facts and logic and reason and evidence and those types of things, I think we'll get along swimmingly. It's just that when they're not, that I will go to another person. So I think it's going to be fine. I think we all are wanting the same things, and we need the same things for our constituents. And so I believe that with the right amount of transparency, that this can be done.
All right, and especially since the primary elections, you often hear Democrats being called socialists, especially after Gilliam's success in the primary. So my question is, what is a socialist to you, and do you consider yourself as such as a Democrat? Mel?
So I hate labels to begin with. Everyone knows that about me. So when you're talking about a word that has a spectrum of meaning, you try not to use the word. And if and when the word is used against you, you try to educate them. And if they don't want to be educated, you move on. And so the technical definition of socialism is when the workers have control over pretty much the government, the way things are in society. That's not what we are about. That's not what the Constitution is about. And so, no, I'm not a socialist. I don't know anyone who is. Anyone in the Democratic Party, no one. So I believe that the closest label that I've found so far is a pragmatic progressive. And that's just someone, like I said, who goes along with the evidence of the issue, searching for the truth of the matter to make sure and take care of our public interest as balanced against the private agendas.
Pam, do you consider yourself a socialist?
I will tag on to what Mel said. I definitely do not like labels, and it is not one that I accept, nor those that are around me. There are areas that we believe in doing good for others as a group, And so sometimes that becomes part of that label. So I don't see the people that are against socialism being against Social Security or Medicare or some other things that we do to make sure that we have taken care of our society. So I don't claim that label. I would reject that. And in fact, at that same dinner I was just talking about, one man came up and said, he looked at the card I had and looked at Andrew Gillum and said, "Oh, I heard he was a socialist." Well, we had a little bit more conversation, but that didn't go too far. But I do think that is something that is thrown, but it's not appropriate.
Right, so I'm going to throw in an immigration question. Should the legislature pass a law prohibiting sanctuary cities or county sanctuary policies? Why or why not? Pam?
I think that what is used in that term of a sanctuary city is really actually just the community looking to all people instead of putting a label of somebody that's determined to be illegal by some. So I think that we have found, through what I've read, I see that cities that treat people well, as you would want to be treated, end up being successful if they start trying to check every person, and they run into problems with their law enforcement and things like that. So I think that having the home rule be able to decide how they're going to treat people is appropriate.
Mel, on sanctuary cities?
Sure. I think we can start off with the fact that we all want Congress to enact comprehensive immigration reform to ensure a just and fair system for all concerned. So when talking about sanctuary cities, for me, it's a fiscal law issue. I believe that cities and counties have the right to say, this is how we're going to manage our funds, and say, and actually, instead of a sanctuary city, it should be called do your own job, ICE city. It's their mission, it's their prerogative to go and find people who should be deported. There's nothing in sanctuary cities that says that they're not going to be notifying the federal authorities when there's someone pops up in the system. However, there should be no mandate that forces local governments to spend their funds for a federal mission.
Thank you. And you both talked about home rule, so my next question is along the same lines. The legislature has proposed a law in recent years that curtail local government's ability to pass regulations on things such as landscaping, businesses, and vacation rentals. Do you believe there are instances in which the legislature should preempt home rule, and explain your position? Mel, you're going first.
I think there are appropriate things like when it comes to monitoring and tweaking systems for statewide concerns like justice. If there is found systemic injustice, the state has prerogative to look in and investigate and say what's up and make things right. Similarly with the environment, if a local government is not doing what they're supposed to be doing and just lets a lagoon, let's just say, fall to pot, then the state has a prerogative to say, this is all of our treasure. We need to ensure that you do this, this, and this to make things right. So I think there are definitely, there's a nexus there if and when a statewide interest is involved, like anything that deals with our economic engines.
Pam?
I believe that the state has some minimum standards in things, particularly in the environment, that they can set that is across the state. But I think in general, I would believe in the home rule because the local community knows better what their needs are, and if they want to go beyond and have a little bit more requirements because their community needs that, then I think that they are the ones that should make that decision. So in general, I would say I support home rule.
Okay. I'm going to move on to a minor issue that actually isn't that minor, but which is the issue of texting while driving. Right now, texting and driving is a secondary offense, meaning you gotta get pulled over for something else before you can get a ticket for texting and driving. There have been several efforts to make that a primary offense, but all those bills have failed. So I want to know if you support such legislation to make texting while driving a primary offense. Pam?
Because it's a safety issue, I think that that is something that we do need to consider. I'm actually surprised that it hasn't passed before now in our state. I think it gets a little complicated because there are things that you can do with your phone in the car that are geared towards driving, such as GPS and things like that. So it gets a little bit complicated how they're going to know whether you're trying to find the directions to your next spot or whether you're using the phone to text. But I would certainly try to do whatever we can to discourage people from misusing their phones in the car as a safety issue for all those around it. And I need to remind myself of that sometimes, true.
Yeah, I do. Mel?
Yes, this is actually the very first issue I was lobbied on by a young gentleman, a student who really cared about this issue over a year ago. And when I looked into it, everything made sense to me. If there, whenever there's data and evidence supporting a certain legislative action, that piques my interest. I think what I'm concerned on is the tailoring of the bill itself to ensure it's not used as a subterfuge for profiling or whatnot. It's something that should be objectively easy to prove, and I think that this is years ago, in the 90s, when Virginia outlawed holding your phone at all, So that's, why aren't we doing that, is my question. Because when you're texting, when you're holding your phone, there, whether or not you have a map program on, it's still a distraction. Texting is worse, but I think that we can look at the actual danger of the phone in a car and revisit this issue.
All right, so we have less than 3 minutes, so we're going to move on to our closing statements. You have 1 minute to make your best case to voters. Mel, you're going first. 1 minute.
I'm a process girl. If you don't think that my positions on any of these issues is correct, then please bring me the evidence, bring me the argument, the sound reason argument of why I should be persuaded to vote differently, okay? I am open to those types of persuasive arguments. I believe in reconnecting with the people, okay? That's primarily why I wanted to do this crazy show, because I believe that there is a huge disconnect between the people and our own government, and you can't just sit idly by when that is happening. And you can see the ruin throughout all of the public systems in Florida, and it's going to be affecting my kids. So these are things that we all need to step up for and do something about.
I'm going to move on because we're running out of time. Pam?
My goal as a state representative is to bring citizen involvement to our state government. I would like to see teams of experts along with teams of citizens helping to advise me in some of the very complicated issues that we're going to be dealing with. I think that our trust in our government is being, I have people that when I go to their door, they say that if I'm not a crook now, I will be. And I think that is one of the most disturbing things that I have seen. So I want to get people involved so that they are part of the process and can help be part of the solution. And I think that will restore their trust so that we have a better, lives are better, so our environment is better,
I'm going to
our
have to
schools.
cut you off at
Thanks.
10 minutes, but that's it for our forum here at Florida Today and WEFS. Stay tuned. Go back to floridatoday.com to rewatch this forum. Thank you.